Mr. Chairman, members, my name is James Quintero. I represent the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I want to thank you for taking up this measure today. I'll be testifying in support of the bill. In the ideal, certificates of obligation offer political subdivisions a tool to deal with emergencies and unforeseen situations. However, it's becoming increasingly clear that COs are being used to finance projects that are either discretionary in nature or that local officials don't want to put before voters at all. And I just want to offer up a few examples to punctuate the point. In 2021, the city of Amarillo opened the Thompson Park Pool, which was funded through a $7.9 million CO issuance. And that particular facility included a lazy river, cabanas, and a main pool area large enough for 400 people. In another instance, in 2023, the Pflugerville City Council authorized a $153 million CO issuance to pay for a new city hall, a recreation center, and other facilities for its downtown east development area. In a third example, in 2024, the Seguin City Council approved a $105.4 million issuance, which included an $8.1 million set-aside to completely renovate the Starkey Park Golf Course. So we may not agree on whether or not those are an appropriate government functions or government projects, but hopefully we can agree that those items ought to be put up for approval via a public election. I think the fact that they're not partially explains why CO debt is on the rise. Of course, Representative Bryant rightfully mentioned that CO debt has increased by almost 100% over the last 10 years. The little bit of data that I'll add to that is that city governments are actually responsible for 80% of that CO debt outstanding. If you look at the top 20 highest issuers, you'll notice that 38.1% of all CO debt outstanding is attributable to them, and that's per the Bond Review Board. If you look at that list, only one hospital district is on the list of the top 20 highest issuers, that's Bexar County. All the rest consist of cities and counties. What to make of this? Well, I make that we need new and stronger protections to guard against future CO abuse. I'd recommend that we limit the use to needs, not wants. We ought to also allow, or disallow, I should say, them to be used to go around voters for fear of embarrassment or rejection. And we need to make it easier for the public to challenge unwanted CO debt. One last thing, and I want to applaud you, Chairman Lambert, for bringing to light a very important issue, and that is, in 2019, the legislature reformed or modernized the property tax revenue limitation. But when they did so, they excluded the issuance of CO debt from the calculation, even though it contributes to the overall property tax burden. I'm not aware of a particular instance in which a governing body has admitted that we are utilizing CO debt so as to get around that limitation. However, I think the temptation is obvious, and that it merits a response on the part of the legislature to tighten the use and the definitions around this particular vehicle so as to protect taxpayers moving forward and to be more in line with the intent of that 19 legislation. So for all of those reasons, I want to encourage the body to look favorably on HB 1453. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Members, questions? I want to mention one thing, and that is, I don't think we've touched on this at all, but even when COs are issued, a city council must vote on that, correct?
Yes, sir.
A county commissioner's court would have to vote on that, a school board, hospital district. We're all accountable for our decisions that we make. Aren't those city council members and county commissioners accountable to the public as well? And are they not subject to 2-year, 4-year terms where they would be removed if they were out of control and exercising very non-frugal type activities? Would that be the other recourse, I guess you might say, in terms of how debt is issued and how debt is utilized by these governmental entities? Would you agree with that?
I would agree. In the ideal, I absolutely believe that the public ought to be more involved in the process and articulate their concerns. One challenge with the current environment is if you look at any local government agenda, we'll just pick on City of Austin because I'm most familiar with them, they tend to load up their agendas with lots and lots and lots of different items, right? And so to ask somebody who's been at work all day to get off work and go talk to the city council, even though they're going to have to wait for an unknown amount of time to issue a concern on some very obscure public financing instrument, I think is a little unreasonable. But yes, I do think that public participation needs to be improved. They need to get more involved, and that's actually perhaps an argument to disallow so much activity on the CO side and push more things to the general obligation side so that the public can get more involved.
Okay, thank you. Members, other questions? Yes, sir. Representative Hayes.
Thank you. In the last session, we passed a bill to kind of rein in public finance corporations.
Yes, sir.
And then the effort by the development community was to switch to a different section of the code, housing finance corporations, with similar problems of why we control PFC. So my inquiry here is there's a number of financing vehicles available to governmental bodies. And is it, if we control just the certificate of obligations, is there something else that's going to pop up where they can go around the elbow to get to the thumb to, do a workaround? So my inquiry is, what other financing vehicles do you see out there that are problematic if abused?
Representative, I think that's a terrific question. So just for a little bit of context, I'm actually knee-deep into a dissertation looking at Texas's property tax revenue limitation. And when you look at the economics literature, one thing that's very clear is the fact that governments have creative workarounds for almost every fiscal rule imaginable, which is why I tend to think that the emphasis needs to be on spending limitations as opposed to chasing one-off items. Not that it isn't well and appropriate to single out particular revenue limitations or instruments, but ultimately I hope the body gets to the place where we're instituting a comprehensive and strict spending limit that governs how much government is consuming on the part of everyday activities.
So what would be your recommendation in regards to spending limitation?
Well, that's a great question. So if you note, Texas state government is actually already subject to 5 different statutory and constitutional spending limits. I would suggest the most aggressive of those is the one that limits the rate of general revenue-related appropriations to population and inflation. My plea to the committee and perhaps to the larger body is simply apply the same standards that you all observe down to the local level, and I think that would take us in a tremendously positive direction.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Representative Bryant.
Mr. Quintero, you've, I guess, looked at the 2%, the change from 5% to 2% of the voters. I just want to observe and get your response to this. I did a little Google check here, and the first example given by Mr. Tepper was Ector County. It has 164,000 people. It has 83,000 registered voters. 2% of that's 1,600 voters. I mean, one civic organization, one church, just one group of folks that are mad maybe about something entirely different could stop this by signing petitions in that county. And that's a middle-sized county there. Isn't that bad policy?
No, I think that's a reasonable concern, sir. But I would suggest that the most likely outcome of that activity is simply to shift from a process whereby voters are not really involved in the issuance to one in which they are, or they do participate in saying yes or no to a set of public projects. So I think the outcome is more favorable when you look at public participation and voter input.
Well, I think there's something to be said about what your response there, but I can't think of anything that's ever passed on the ballot that didn't have 2% opposition in a general election. And it's quite easy to get 1,600 signatures against anything. I mean, you remember we had this big disagreement during COVID over what kind of restrictions were necessary, and there was always a group that was against all restrictions, no matter how urgently they were needed. And so I can imagine something like that, this getting in the way of a policy by the local hospital district trying to catch up with a pandemic. That doesn't resonate a little bit with you?
You know, I think it's a fair concern. Perhaps, you know, as I understand the committee substitute to 1453, it more narrowly tailors the list of allowable items that a CO can pay for. I think that's a very good pathway to walk down. I would like to see that list narrowed even further, and perhaps that would assuage some of the concerns with the petition process, because if voters feel confident that, hey, my governing body is issuing CO debt, but it's for things we actually need, it's not for a lazy river or a new city hall or some other discretionary project, that's probably where much of the controversy arises from, is the fact that voters feel like they're already overtaxed and the things that government are doing is perhaps not mission critical.
Okay, thank you.
Members, other questions? If not, we thank